I'm going to read the full thing. We were covering this last night, some of the internal disputes, if you want to put it that way, between Bondi and the FBI's Dan Bongino related to the Epstein files. This is what Trump said on Truth Social moments ago. I'm reading it verbatim. What's going on with my boys and, in some cases, gals? They're all going after Attorney General Pam Bondi, who is doing a fantastic job. We're on one team, MAGA, and I don't like what's happening. We have a perfect administration, the talk of the world, and selfish people are trying to hurt it, all over a guy who never dies, Jeffrey Epstein. For years, it's Epstein over and over again. Why are we giving publicity to files written by Obama, Crooked Hillary, Comey, Brennan, and the losers and criminals of the Biden administration who conned the world with the Russia hoax, 51 intelligence agents, the laptop from hell, and more? They created the Epstein files just like they created the fake Hillary Clinton, Christopher Steele dossier that they used on me, and now my so-called friends are playing right into their hands. Why didn't these radical left lunatics release the Epstein files? If there was anything in there that could have hurt the MAGA movement, why didn't they use it?
Okay, so Attorney General Pam Bondi is under massive fire right now for openly violating Department of Justice rules and protocols. We're not talking about questionable judgment or gray areas here. We're talking about clear, documented violations of the regulations that are supposed to keep the Justice Department independent from presidential politics. Multiple legal experts are saying Bondi has systematically dismantled the safeguards that prevent DOJ from being weaponized for political purposes, and she's doing it openly, brazenly, without even pretending to follow the rules anymore. Can you believe this? The nation's top law enforcement official is breaking the very rules she's supposed to enforce. This is corruption at the highest levels, and it's happening in plain sight. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. Let me break down what Bondi has actually done, because the details are absolutely damning. During a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on October 7th, Democrats confronted Bondi over what they call open political interference. And Bondi actually admitted under oath in public testimony that she's been consulting directly with Trump about dropping federal inquiries into his allies. We're talking about cases against Letitia James, who prosecuted Trump's business, cases against James Comey, the former FBI director who investigated Trump. These aren't random cases. These are investigations into people Trump has personal vendettas against. And Bondi is admitting she's coordinating with Trump on whether to drop those cases. That's not how the Justice Department is supposed to work. The Attorney General is supposed to make prosecutorial decisions independently based on evidence and law, not based on what the president wants. Second, Scripps News exposed that Bondi fired the DOJ's top ethics officer back in July. Think about what that means. The ethics officer exists specifically to prevent conflicts of interest, to ensure DOJ officials aren't letting political considerations influence their decisions. That position is supposed to be independent, protected, insulated from political pressure. And Bondi just fired that person and eliminated the position entirely. Legal experts are calling this a textbook violation of federal ethics obligations that protect against presidential influence. When you fire the person whose job is to catch you doing unethical things, that tells you everything you need to know about your intentions. Third, the Brennan Center warned this week that Bondi's conduct exemplifies a broken accountability system. They're accusing DOJ of dismantling all the controls that once separated law enforcement duties from political loyalty. It's not just one decision or one firing. It's a systematic pattern of removing every check, every safeguard, every institutional protection that was designed to keep DOJ independent. Bondi is essentially restructuring the Justice Department to serve Trump personally rather than to serve the law. Fourth, Bondi has repeatedly and publicly pledged that Trump's enemies will see justice. Let that sink in. The Attorney General of the United States is openly saying she's going to use the Justice Department to go after the president's political enemies, not criminals, not people who've broken laws, enemies, people Trump doesn't like, people who investigated him or criticized him or prosecuted him. And she's saying this out loud in public, apparently not even understanding or caring that this is corrupt and illegal. Meanwhile, she's ignoring statutory recusal requirements when personally overseeing these politically sensitive cases. The New York Times called her behavior an ethical implosion without precedent since Watergate, and Watergate led to Nixon resigning in disgrace. Fifth, According to Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, Bondi's earlier memos disbanded the DOJ's anti-corruption and foreign influence task forces. These were units specifically tasked with investigating embezzlement, fraud, and foreign election meddling, and Bondi just shut them down entirely. That means investigations into corruption under Trump's administration just stopped. Investigations into foreign governments trying to influence American elections just stopped. Not because the crime stopped happening, but because Bondi decided those investigations were inconvenient for Trump politically. 6. In an October 23rd exchange, Bondi tried to defend Trump from a question about an active grand jury investigation, but then she admitted she couldn't legally discuss the case because grand jury proceedings are supposed to be secret. So she's willing to publicly discuss dropping investigations into Trump's enemies, but she claims she can't discuss investigations into Trump because of legal restrictions. That's such obvious hypocrisy. Either you follow the rules about not discussing ongoing cases, or you don't. You can't selectively apply rules based on whether the case helps or hurts Trump politically. The erosion of DOJ independence under Bondi is being described as the clearest breakdown of Justice Department neutrality in modern American history. By consolidating Trump-loyal officials throughout DOJ, by firing career watchdogs and ethics officers, by publicly pledging to prosecute Trump's enemies while protecting Trump himself, Bondi has turned the Justice Department into Trump's personal law firm. And that's not hyperbole, that's an accurate description of what's happening based on her own statements and actions. Congressional watchdogs and public interest groups are now considering formal misconduct complaints against Bondi. There's talk of House inquiries into her politicization of prosecutorial discretion. Even some Republicans are privately expressing concern that Bondi has gone too far, that she's so blatant in her corruption that it's becoming impossible to defend. When your own party starts questioning whether you've crossed lines, that's a sign you've really screwed up. So yeah, Pam Bondi is systematically violating DOJ rules and protocols. She's consulting with Trump on dropping investigations into his enemies. She fired the ethics officer who would have stopped her. She disbanded anti-corruption task forces. She pledges to prosecute Trump's political opponents while protecting Trump himself. And she's doing all of this openly, apparently confident that she faces no consequences. This is what corruption looks like at the highest levels of government. And we need to dig into why this matters, what laws she's actually breaking, and what can be done to stop her. All right, let's dig into what specific rules and norms Bondi is violating and why DOJ independence matters so much. First, we need to understand that the Justice Department is supposed to be semi-independent from the White House. Yes, the president appoints the Attorney General, and technically the AG serves at the pleasure of the president, but there are long-standing norms, regulations, and in some cases laws that limit how much the president can direct specific prosecutorial decisions. These exist because we learned the hard way during Watergate and other scandals that when presidents control prosecutions directly, they use that power to protect themselves and attack their enemies rather than to enforce laws fairly. The regulations specifically prohibit the Attorney General from considering political factors when making prosecutorial decisions. You're supposed to look at evidence, apply legal standards, and make decisions based on whether crimes were committed and whether prosecution serves the public interest. You're not supposed to think about whether the target is a political ally or enemy, whether prosecution helps or hurts the president politically, whether bringing charges would be convenient or inconvenient for the administration. Those considerations are explicitly prohibited. And Bondi is openly violating that prohibition by admitting she coordinates with Trump and by publicly pledging to go after his enemies. The ethics officer position that Bondi eliminated existed specifically to enforce these rules. That officer was supposed to review politically sensitive cases, identify potential conflicts of interest, and recommend recusals when necessary. When the Attorney General has a potential conflict, like when she's investigating people the president has personal vendettas against, the ethics officer would say, "You need to recuse yourself and let someone independent handle this." By firing that person and eliminating the position, Bondi removed the one internal check on her own misconduct. That's deliberate and calculated. She knew that officer would try to stop her from doing what Trump wanted, so she just got rid of the position entirely. The disbanding of anti-corruption and foreign influence task forces is particularly troubling because those weren't just general-purpose units. They had specific ongoing investigations when Bondi shut them down. There were cases looking into potential embezzlement and misuse of government funds. There were investigations into foreign governments trying to influence American elections, possibly including investigations that touched on Trump or his associates, and Bondi just ended all of that work. She didn't let the cases finish, didn't transfer them to other prosecutors, just shut the whole thing down. That's obstruction of justice. That's using her position to kill investigations that might have been damaging to Trump. The consultation with Trump about dropping cases is perhaps the most clearly illegal thing Bondi has done. There are specific DOJ regulations that prohibit the White House from directing prosecutorial decisions in specific cases. The White House can set broad policy priorities, like we want DOJ to focus more on violent crime or drug trafficking. But they can't say drop the investigation into this specific person, pursue charges against that specific person. Those have to be independent prosecutorial judgments. By consulting with Trump about whether to drop cases against specific individuals who happen to be his enemies, Bondi violated those regulations explicitly, and she did it under oath in public testimony, which means there's no ambiguity about whether it happened. The recusal violations are also serious. Federal law and DOJ regulations require officials to recuse themselves from matters where they have a conflict of interest or where their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. When Bondi is overseeing prosecutions of people Trump has publicly attacked and promised to punish, her impartiality is obviously questionable. Any reasonable observer would doubt whether she can make fair decisions about those cases. So she's required to recuse herself and let someone who doesn't have that conflict handle the cases. But she's not doing that. She's personally overseeing exactly the cases where her conflicts are most obvious and most problematic. The public pledges to prosecute Trump's enemies violate DOJ policies about public statements. Prosecutors aren't supposed to make public declarations about who they plan to target or what their political agenda is. You're supposed to investigate and prosecute quietly based on evidence and only make public statements when you're actually bringing charges and can explain the evidence. Bondi's out there promising to go after Trump's enemies before investigations are even complete, before evidence has been gathered. That's prejudging outcomes. That's making prosecutions about politics rather than law, and is completely contrary to how DOJ is supposed to operate. The Brennan Center's description of this as a broken accountability system is accurate. All these different violations, the consultations with Trump, the firing of the ethics officer, the disbanding of task forces, the refusal to recuse, the public political statements, they add up to a system where there are no longer any checks on the Attorney General's power. Bondi can do whatever Trump wants, and there's no internal mechanism to stop her. The career prosecutors who would normally push back have been intimidated or fired. The ethics officer who would flag problems is gone. The task forces that were investigating uncomfortable truths have been disbanded. The regulations that would require recusal are being ignored. Every safeguard has been removed or neutralized. The comparison to Watergate is apt because this is following the same pattern. Nixon tried to use DOJ to go after his enemies and protect himself. When his attorney general and deputy attorney general refused to fire the special prosecutor investigating him, Nixon kept firing people until he found someone who would do what he wanted. That's called the Saturday Night Massacre, and is considered one of the most corrupt abuses of power in American history. And Bondi is essentially implementing that same approach, but more systematically and comprehensively. She's not just making one corrupt decision, she's restructuring the entire Justice Department to serve Trump's political interests. The bipartisan concern from lawyers is significant, because usually legal ethics issues break down along partisan lines. Democrats say something is unethical, Republicans defend it, and vice versa. But we're seeing lawyers from both parties saying Bondi has crossed clear lines. That's because what she's doing isn't subtle or ambiguous. She's openly admitting to things that are clearly prohibited. She's not even trying to hide behind legalese or complicated justifications. She's just doing it, and apparently assuming there will be no consequences because Trump protects her. Okay, let's break down what this actually means and what might happen next. Point number 1, Bondi's actions represent a fundamental threat to the rule of law. If the Attorney General can openly violate DOJ rules to serve the president's political interests and face no consequences, then we don't really have an independent justice system anymore. We have a system where the president can use federal law enforcement to punish enemies and protect allies. That's authoritarianism. That's what happens in countries where the law is just a tool of political power rather than a neutral system of accountability. The firing of the ethics officer is particularly significant because it shows premeditation. Bondi didn't accidentally violate rules and then get caught. She deliberately eliminated the person who would have caught her before she started violating rules. That's consciousness of guilt. That's someone who knows what they're about to do is wrong and wants to make sure there's no one around to stop them. And the fact that she could just fire that person and eliminate that position shows how broken the accountability system already was. Point number 2. The formal misconduct complaints and potential House inquiries matter because they create official records and could lead to real consequences. A misconduct complaint to the Office of Professional Responsibility or to the D.C. Bar could result in disciplinary action against Bondi, potentially even disbarment. A House inquiry could result in impeachment articles. Neither of those outcomes is certain, or probably even likely, given political realities, but the fact that they're being seriously discussed shows how extreme Bondi's conduct is. The challenge with accountability is that most of the mechanisms for disciplining the Attorney General require political will. The president could fire her, but Trump appointed her specifically because she'd do his bidding, so he's not going to fire her for doing what he wants. Congress could investigate or impeach, but Republicans control Congress, and most of them are afraid to cross Trump. The DC bar could discipline her, but that's a slow process and may not have much practical impact while she's still Attorney General. So Bondi may face no immediate consequences despite her obvious violations. Point number 3, the long-term damage to DOJ as an institution is severe. Even if Bondi eventually leaves office, the damage she's doing to DOJ's reputation and independence will take years or decades to repair. Career prosecutors are demoralized. The public's trust in DOJ is eroding. Foreign governments and international partners are questioning whether America still has rule of law. Future attorneys general, even well-intentioned ones, will inherit an institution that's been corrupted and politicized. Rebuilding that independence and credibility will be incredibly difficult. The disbanded task forces can't just be quickly reconstituted. The investigations they were working on have gone cold. Witnesses have scattered. Evidence has degraded. Statutes of limitations may have run on some offenses. The institutional knowledge about how to investigate complex corruption and foreign influence cases has been lost as people transferred to other jobs or left DOJ entirely. Even if a future attorney general wants to restart those efforts, they're basically starting from scratch rather than continuing ongoing work. Point number 4, this creates a template for future abuse. If Bondi can do all this and face no consequences, future attorneys general from either party will know they can get away with the same things. Democrats might install an AG who fires ethics officers and goes after Republican enemies. Republicans might do the same in the next administration. The norm of DOJ independence, once broken, is very hard to reestablish, and the result is a justice system that flip-flops based on who's in power rather than consistently applying law regardless of politics. So what are the realistic scenarios? Scenario 1, Bondi continues doing what she's doing with no consequences. Republicans protect her, Trump keeps her in place, and she successfully weaponizes DOJ for Trump's political benefit. That's probably the most likely scenario given current political dynamics, and it's the worst outcome for rule of law. Scenario 2, public pressure and negative coverage become so intense that even Trump calculates it's not worth keeping Bondi. He pushes her to resign or fires her and replaces her with someone slightly less blatantly corrupt. DOJ gets marginally better, but the fundamental damage is done. That's a possible outcome if media coverage stays focused on this and if polling shows it's hurting Republicans politically. Scenario 3, House Democrats launch a serious investigation and build a comprehensive public record of Bondi's misconduct. That doesn't lead to her removal because Republicans protect her, but it educates the public and creates political costs that constrain her ability to keep acting so openly corrupt. She has to be slightly more subtle, even if she doesn't stop entirely. Scenario 4, some unexpected event forces accountability. Maybe Bondi breaks a law so clearly that even Trump can't protect her. Maybe courts intervene and order investigations into her conduct. Maybe whistleblowers inside DOJ provide evidence that's so damning that Congress has to act. That's unlikely, but possible. The concern about cascading constitutional fallout is real. When DOJ independence breaks down, it affects everything. Courts rely on DOJ to enforce their orders. What happens when DOJ selectively enforces based on politics? States rely on DOJ to coordinate on interstate crime. What happens when DOJ uses that coordination power for partisan advantage? International partners rely on DOJ in fighting transnational crime. What happens when they can't trust that DOJ is acting in good faith rather than serving political agendas? Congress now faces a real question about whether DOJ still serves the law or just serves the presidency. That's not a rhetorical question, it's a practical one that affects how Congress does oversight, how it funds DOJ, how it interacts with DOJ on legislation. If Congress concludes that DOJ has been completely corrupted, they might need to create new independent mechanisms for prosecution and investigation. That would be a massive institutional change with unpredictable consequences. The comparison to Watergate keeps coming up because we're in similar territory. Nixon tried to corrupt DOJ and use it for political purposes. The institution pushed back, people resigned rather than comply, courts intervened, and eventually Nixon was forced out. But that outcome required a lot of things to go right. A functioning Congress willing to investigate, courts willing to rule against the president, media willing to cover it aggressively, Republicans eventually willing to put country over party. We don't know yet whether those conditions exist now. Early signs are mixed. This story is really important because it's about whether we still have rule of law or whether we've transitioned to rule by Trump. Bondi is testing how far she can go in corrupting DOJ to serve Trump's interests. If she can do everything she's currently doing with no consequences, then the answer is pretty clear. There are no functional limits anymore. But if there's pushback that actually constrains her, if there are costs that make this unsustainable, then maybe the system still has some ability to self-correct. We're going to find out which over the next few months. Stay tuned because this is absolutely critical to American democracy.